Market Musings podcast with Fairbairn and Russell. Hello and welcome to the Market Musings podcast, where today we have a guest, a geologist and a market commentator, research analyst for the first time on the podcast, and that is Dr. Ryan Long. Very good to be speaking to you, Ryan, and welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm very well, Mark. Thanks very much for having me on.
No, it's good to be speaking to you. So I know a little bit about your background, but maybe we can start a couple of minutes just talk about your background. Really, I know you are a geologist and you do a lot of research pieces, and I've seen some site visits that you've done to various projects around the world. But maybe if you want to give us a small little introduction to who you are and what kind of work you're into.
Sure, Mark. So I trained as a geologist many years ago. Studied at Camborne School of Mines and then got a PhD from the Economic Geology Research Unit down in Australia. Since then, I've worked in mining operations and exploration projects everywhere from Australia to Saudi Arabia. I worked in the city for about 10 years as an analyst with a company called Northland Capital Partners. And since then, I've sort of set up my own research consultancy where I work with a number of companies, and I also have my own newsletter that I produce.
Excellent. Okay. Would you say is it fair to say then that you know mining projects? You could tell a good one from a bad one, can you? Or maybe let's say one that has good prospects versus one that is more risky?
I'd certainly like to think so, Mark. I've been doing this for around 20 years now, so it's sort of my bread and butter.
Excellent. Well, one of the companies we're going to talk about today in this podcast is Marula Mining, and lots of listeners on Stopbox will know Marula Mining because the CEO, Jason Brewer, is very regularly on for interviews as he very rapidly presses on with developments across the different projects in the company, and also, of course, his new company at the minute, Shuka Minerals, which is just getting started. But I thought it might be good to get your take on Marula. Of course, their focus is the Blesberg project, but they also have the Canusi copper and also their graphite project as well. But I thought, using your background, maybe you've done a little bit of research into Marula, you could perhaps tell us what you think of the company, what you think of the stage of the projects, the risk. Is it too good to be true? And we can have a bit of a chat about Marula Mining. So, over to you.
Yeah, okay, perfect, Mark. Thank you. So the Blesberg lithium project, that's located in the northern province, Northern Cape, South Africa. And the whole idea Marula has with Blesberg is to try and use the historic dumps that are on site and reprocess them and generate some cash flow. These historic dumps have been shown to contain spodumene mineralization, and basically reprocessing them generates some cash and just reduce its reliance on dilutive equity placings. Now, these historic dumps have been estimated, and I'd like to emphasize that word, estimated, to contain between 280 and 400,000 tons of material. And the lithium grades of this material within the waste piles vary significantly. This stuff was mined over a period of 80 years. So it's difficult to get a handle on what's really there. So this reprocessing operation has a level of risk attached to it that's outside the normal for a typical development project, which has been advanced for its traditional resource development and feasibility study phases.
And that would be because, as you say, you don't actually know what is in these dumps, really, because, you're not drilling, you're not doing studies as you would traditionally. You're reprocessing these dumps here, so you actually don't know what's in it. Is there any way to test before, or is it just a matter of processing and seeing what comes out?
Well, I think fundamentally what Marula is doing is right. It wouldn't make economic sense for them to spend a vast amount of money to complete the conventional exploration stages you'd see for a normal development project, just because of the the scale of these historic waste deposits. I've spoke with management a few times, and they believe it's feasible for the reprocessing operation to reach around 1,000 tons of spodumene concentrate production per month from around the fourth quarter of this year.
Okay.
And that based on the estimated scale of these dumps, that they can maintain the production level for 2 years. So, it's hard to justify spending millions and millions sort of fully sampling these very variable waste piles, going down resource estimation, doing detailed feasibility studies when, the materials sat there at surface. It's in stockpiles. You don't have the mining cost associated with it. You're just scooping it up and reprocessing it. So it should be a high margin exercise.
Okay.
But the problem we have,
Go on.
The problem I guess we have is that without any economic study, it's difficult for us to assess the true value and of what's actually there right now. So I think investors should, rather than trying to assign a tangible value, they should look at this as a reprocessing operation that could generate some cash flow, but risk it accordingly.
Okay. Well, of course, I know the team at Marula are wanting to get into the hard rock. I think that the exploration drilling of that actually started this week, and they want to get a JORC resource within a few months. Before we get on to that, the sort of the hard rock exploration, just on these dumps then, how common is a kind of reprocessing of historic dump operation? I mean, as I understand with Marula, they're there because at the time when this mine was active for, I can't actually recall what it was active for, but lithium at the time was not important or not in demand. But of course, now with batteries, that is becoming more in demand. So effectively, I think, was it classed almost as waste in this regard? And now it's obviously got some value to it.
Yeah, I think historically these mines would have been tantalum mines. So anything else, feldspars, spodumene, anything else that was in the pegmatite at the time, there was no sort of economic use for those materials. So they were just dumped quite close to the operation. And in terms of how common they are, it's interesting. You are starting to see a number of companies go back to historic tantalum projects, historic tin projects. They tend to be pegmatite projects, and re-examine some of the historic dumps and tailings and just see what level of spodumene mineralization in there. I know there's companies doing it in Zimbabwe, and there's probably other companies doing it elsewhere. I wouldn't say it's common. I think it's quite unusual what Marula's doing, but I think it makes logical sense given the asset they've got.
Okay, that's interesting. So do you often find lithium along the tantalum deposit?
Not necessarily with tantalum, but often it's associated with tin, as we've seen down in Cornwall, and you see in Zimbabwe as well. It can be, spodumene itself can be associated with other lithium minerals, such as petalite. So often there are other things in the mix when the pegmatites are formed. Potentially Marula can do some things with some of these other minerals as well. Potentially the feldspar could be sold, but possibly some of the quartz. Maybe there's still some residual tantalum. So there could be upside for this project as well in terms of the minerals it produces.
Okay. And as you said earlier, investors should look at this as a reprocessing operation at the moment, getting in cash flow. And I think you also mentioned that would alleviate the need, let's say, for dilutive placings if there's some positive cash flow coming in. But is there any way to attribute any value or to make some projections? I think you said that, or you talking to management, that they're expecting 1,000 ton of spodumene per month for what, 2 years? So I guess then, how would you start pricing in what that could mean from a net cash basis to the company?
Well, as I said, it's difficult to assess just because we don't have any reliable economic studies done. We can produce estimates, but investors really need to place a level of risk associated with those estimates that is above the normal for a typical development project.
Mm.
We know that Pilbara Minerals sold its 3.5% spodumene concentrate for an average price of 3,200 US dollars into Chinese markets, and that was in the June quarter. Now, Marula are expecting to produce a higher grade concentrate than that, but for now, so it could get a higher price, but I guess for now, let's go with the 5.3% spodumene. And also, we know that UBS are forecasting Aussie spodumene, SC6 spodumene, to fetch an average of 3,750 US dollars a ton in the second half of this year, and 3,500 US dollars a ton in 2024. So if we're going with that Pilbara Minerals estimate, which is 3,200 US dollars a ton, we're in the right ballpark. Now, 1,000 tons a month, 3,200 US dollars a ton, that's just over $3 million in revenue, around 40 million US in over 12 months. But that's very much a back of the cigarette packet type estimate for revenue, and it should be treated so by investors. We know that this is a reprocessing operation, so we would expect it to be low cost, but as yet we don't have any studies to confirm that. So I think we can see that there could be a very nice income coming from this project for a company of Marula's size. And you can also see that that level of revenue wouldn't justify spending millions and millions on evaluation costs for the reprocessing operation. The hard rock potential is different, but focusing on the tailings, I think their strategy makes sense.
Yes. Okay. So potentially, and we will stress these are sort of back of fag packet calculations, potentially 3 million revenue every month.
So just to go over the maths again, it's 1,000 tons per month, 3,200 US dollars per ton. So we get just over $3 million per month. So that's around 40 million over 12 months.
Okay. Well, that's not to be sniffed at, is it? That's some decent money there, but like you say, it's not worth spending millions on doing different studies, particularly if the tailings are only good for a couple of years. It's nice to get the company going with some decent cash flow, but
exactly.
We need longer life of mine, really.
Very much so, and I think a lot of exploration companies are reliant on the market, and hopefully with what it's doing, Marula won't be in that situation where it's solely relying on the market to fund the company.
Indeed,
it will be able to self-sustain itself.
Indeed, that's a very good position for any junior mining company to be in on the markets there. Well, if we're talking about the bigger picture then at Blesberg, getting into the hard rock, as Jason has said many times that they want to do, and drilling has started indeed this week. I think you told me on an interview that it's in two phases. Phase 1 will last 3 months, and they want to get a JORC resource after 3 months. I mean, that's pretty rapid, isn't it? Is that sort of thing realistic?
I think it's perfectly realistic. This deposit's near surface, so you're not drilling deep holes, you're drilling multiple shallow holes. It's all exposed at surface, so they have a pretty good idea of where the pegmatite is and where it isn't, probably more importantly. Alongside the drilling program, they're also going to be doing some trenching and some airborne geophys, which will help refine and define where they're going to drill on an ongoing basis. So, I think an initial resource after phase 1 is perfectly reasonable. And then they've obviously got the phase 2, which can expand the resource base, but also increase the confidence level of the hard rock estimate.
Okay. So in terms of actually getting to that point then, what sort of work do the company need to do? I mean, they announced their work program. I'm sure you've seen it. That was announced earlier this week. So the work program that they've announced, that's perfectly realistic, the amount of drilling they're going for to get to that point. What could investors be looking out for? What are the important things to look out for? I think is probably a better question when the results start to flow through from this drilling that they've just started.
So the drill program, the total drill program, I think it's around 29, 2,900 meters.
Mm.
And they're going to be drilling 38 holes. So those holes, they're less than 100 meters each, sort of around 75 meters deep each hole. So they're going to be quite quick to drill. They'll
Okay.
should be quite quick to log, and hopefully they'll get a decent turnaround time from the assay labs. I think the key thing is going to be when they get those assays back. The grade is obviously something that a lot of people are talking about, just because we don't really have a handle on what the grade is going to be. And obviously the size of these intercepts is going to be important as well. You'd have to imagine, given the scale of the spoil heap, I guess these things are going to be fairly wide. They're going to be doing some mining studies as well, because they are a production-focused company. I think they argue against the sort of title of exploration company right now. They are very much geared towards focusing on getting things to production. So alongside the drilling, they're going to be doing typical development study work. So they're going to be looking at groundwater. They're going to be doing an open pit design, initial mining walks, slope stability, ground hydrology, and all the environmental work associated with putting a mine into production.
So it is too early at the moment, isn't it, there's no point in even speculating on what a value could be or a resource, because, like you say, we simply don't know. And it won't be too long before we can perhaps start doing that. Is that fair to say? There's just no point in speculating. It really comes down to those assay results, the grade, and then the size, if you say, the size of the intercept.
Yeah, I think it's very hard at this stage, very hard. But we don't have to wait too long, do we?
We don't have to wait too long, not at all. And I mean, what would when those results start to flow through, then is anything investors should look out for? Because I know results come through quite a lot in RNSs, and it's difficult to understand what if the grade is good, if it's not so good, what it means across different intercept lengths. So I mean, what would be something that would look good? Let's say what would be a good grade, a good intercept size? Can you give any sort of indication on that?
I mean, it is very difficult because every pegmatite is different, and obviously, you have to balance grade against intercept size. If you have very large intercepts of much lower grade material, that can be fantastic. But also, if you have shorter intercepts of much higher grade material, that can be very good too. So I think it's very difficult to tell at this stage. I think when investors start seeing these drill results, they need to understand that pegmatites are inherently variable. So I think you'll want to look at the results of the whole program holistically rather than on a hole by hole basis, because you'll see an inherent variability in the grades and the intercepts across the initial holes. It's also really important to remember this is the first phase of drilling, and it's very unusual for a company with its first phase of drilling to be getting consistent results. So Marula's in a great position. They can see what's there at surface. They know the spodumene's there. They're doing trenching to help refine that. But fundamentally, it is their first drill program. So, we have to take whatever comes and bear that in mind.
But in terms of lithium or lithium grades or spodumene grades, I don't know which one you would refer to, but in terms of what would be a low grade and what would be a high grade, what would those numbers look like?
Well, I mean, a typical spodumene concentrate, which is sold openly on the market, is around 6%. So,
okay.
and that has been upgraded from its original in situ source. So, I mean, you see, when you look at these deposits on a wider scale, you do see a large variability in grade relative to tonnage. I would imagine, based on what Marula have said, that this is going to be a moderate size but high grade deposit. And as such, if we were seeing seeing things sort of 5, 6, 7% spodumene, that's pretty interesting.
Okay. And equally, though, if it would come in lower, the grade, if the size was bigger, the intercepts, then again, that's a positive. It's lower grade, but there's more of it.
Yeah, and
Okay.
at this stage, we really don't have an idea of what the
No.
potential scale of this project is.
No. Well, that's good. That's good. That's some numbers there to think about anyway. When those results do come out, that does help to give a first bite. But of course, we will have to talk to the CEO at the time, or maybe you again, and of course, wait for the studies to come through to really confirm that. I mean, when it comes to making a JORC resource, how is that actually done? Is it put through some system, and it's again, it's the grades that are going in, and the intercept, and a piece of software spits out a resource?
I'm not sure you could say the software spits out the resource. I'm sure there's a lot of resource geologists that would be very upset with you for that. I mean, resource estimation is the dark art of dark arts.
Okay.
It is something that requires a huge amount of skill and knowledge, not just of mineral deposits, but of the specific mineral deposit you are estimating for, and even within a particular commodity, that the specific style of mineralization. You have to domain areas of varying geological characteristics. You have to do a huge volume of work to understand what the deposit looks like before you even begin to start to do some modeling on it.
Okay.
So, it's not an easy exercise, but for Marula, I think we're expecting this initial resource to be fairly moderate in size, so that process will be quicker as a result.
Okay, I see. And just a final point, Ryan, you mentioned, of course, the mine studies, which is something that Jason mentioned as well. They want to start doing mine studies because they have that production mindset. How does that start? I mean, again, does it sound like it's happening all a bit too fast here? But you can actually start to think forward like that and actually think, okay, how could we potentially mine this on a commercial scale?
I think most companies, you would probably say it's too early to be doing this before you've even completed the first drill program. Marula is very much focused on production. Speaking to Jason and the team, that is what they want to do. They want to get these things into production and generate cash from them. So what I'd imagine, but I don't know, is that they are going to try and fast track the hard rock into production as soon as possible. And in order to do that, there are certain studies that they will need to do to have the confidence themselves to put this thing into production. I don't think we will see traditional feasibility studies, DFSs, PEAs, PFSs from this company. I think they'll probably do some level of internal economic study that they have the confidence in, and then they will move the hard rock into production.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, Ryan. That's been very interesting to talk to you about Marula there. I think that's certainly helped me understand a bit more what's going on at Blesberg and perhaps some of the results to look out for, the certain processes that they will go through, and hopefully that helps investors as well. So thank you very much for joining me today, and hopefully we can speak again soon.
Pleasure, Mark. Thanks so very much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to another podcast from Market Musings with Fairbairn and Russell. Tune in next time.